Human beings are intuitive creatures. That is to say that we have pre-theoretic ideas about a variety of topics that seem to give us some sort of special, immediate access to the truth. These intuitions can be clear or muddled, powerful or weak, specific or generic. Their subject matter ranges from the mundane to the profound, from issues of metaphysics and epistemology to matters of ethics and science. We often group them under that oh-so-nebulous notion that we collectively refer to as common sense. They generally resist calls for rational justification. If we can replace an intuition with a well-grounded argument, we tend to prefer to do so, and that, for the most part, dissolves the need for the intuition in the first place. As it turns out, very little works the way we intuitively think that it does. Human history has been a long process of disabusing ourselves of our intuitions by smashing them against the shores of reality and seeing how they hold up. As a rule, they don't hold up very well at all. But at each step in this long process, intuition's cheerleaders have tried to stick up for it, insisting that reason, evidence, and argument, or at least our interpretations of these things, must be in the wrong. Some have championed our intuitions regarding specific topics, others as a general methodology for coming to know things, others still as the only way to have any kind of foundation for knowledge at all. Intuition's cheerleaders can be found among the most brightest luminaries in nearly all intellectual endeavors. Yet despite their eminence, history has not been kind to these cheerleaders. Let's take a short tour. Starting with the obvious, it seemed intuitively clear for a very long time that the Earth was at the center of the universe, and the Sun and everything else was revolving around it. After all, it does look that way, does it not? But then again, as Ludwig Wittgenstein pointed out, what did they expect the world would look like if it were the other way around? It took about 100 years of tedious, painstaking scientific work between Copernicus's initial proposal of heliocentrism and Galileo establishing it as a scientific fact. And still, doubt persisted amongst much of the populace long after. Such is the inertia of intuition. Geocentrism was the astronomical view endorsed by Aristotle, the preeminent physicist of the ancient world. Aristotle proposed a detailed theory of mechanics that was amplified and expanded upon throughout the Middle Ages. It was eventually falsified and discarded due to the work of Isaac Newton, but strangely enough, those Aristotelian intuitions die hard. So hard, in fact, it seems they may actually be hardwired into our brains. A large battery of tests have shown that people's mechanical intuitions are decidedly Aristotelian. This is true even of people who have studied Newtonian mechanics. If you give them a chance to think it through, they apply the correct Newtonian principles. But if you put them in a situation where they don't have the time to think, where they can only act on intuition, they default back to the Aristotelian model. Despite 300 years of evidence, experiments, education, and applied mechanics, we can't seem to shake the ghost of Aristotle from our repertoire of intuitions. It's not just physics that's plagued by faulty intuitions formalized in ancient Greece. The geometry of Euclid, which is the same geometry that millions of primary school students are taught every year, falls prey to the same buggy, malfunctioning instincts. Euclid based his geometry on 5 axioms, principles that he took to require no rational justification, for they could not be rationally doubted. So certain were Euclid's axioms that René Descartes used them as an example of the kind of indubitability that he was seeking in his cogito argument. For over 2,000 years, geometers were convinced that no rational person, suitably informed, could deny the truth of Euclid's 5 axioms. And as it turns out, they were wrong in more ways than one. Not only is it false that you can't rationally reject any of Euclid's 5 axioms, not only can you have a perfectly consistent geometry with only 4 of the 5 axioms, but in point of fact, the universe in which we live is actually more accurately described by such non-Euclidean geometries. That which was once believed to be rationally undeniable turned out to be just plain wrong. The non-Euclidean nature of our universe was just one consequence of Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, and it wasn't the only thing that greatly humbles our confidence in our ability to intuitively grasp the truth. In addition to overturning the Newtonian paradigm, which had physicists completely convinced that all of the major scientific questions had been solved and the rest was just a matter of mopping up the details, Einstein also killed another intuitive sacred cow: simultaneity. Despite the very powerful intuition to the contrary, no 2 events separated by a non-zero distance ever occur at the same time. Events only occur at the same time relative to certain frames of reference. From other, equally legitimate frames of reference, event A happens before event B. And from other frames of reference still, event B happens before event A. Time, which was thought to be absolute for as long as humans have thought about it, turns out to be relative. Once again, we have to discard our intuitions in light of new discoveries. But the most counterintuitive field of 20th century science has to be quantum mechanics. There are so many bizarre, counterintuitive findings in this field that Richard Feynman, one of the most brilliant scientists of the last 100 years, famously stated that no one understands quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics tells us that a photon is both a wave and a particle, that entangled particles can affect each other instantaneously, as in faster than the speed of light, from vast distances, and even that some particles can actually travel backwards in time. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle states that the act of measuring the precise location of a particle can eliminate any fact of the matter pertaining to its velocity, and the act of measuring its precise velocity can eliminate any fact of the matter pertaining to its position. In other words, under certain conditions, particles can exist, but not exist in a specific location. And they can move, but not move in a specific direction or at a specific speed. Yet despite being radically counterintuitive, the mathematical power of quantum mechanics allows us to make predictive measurements with such stunning accuracy. It's as if we were to measure the distance between San Francisco and New York City within the width of a single human hair. These bizarre effects are sometimes collectively referred to as quantum weirdness to capture how counterintuitive they are. This weirdness gives considerable credence to J.B.S. Haldane's claim that the universe is not only queerer than we suppose, but queerer than we can suppose. And the problem with our intuitions cuts even deeper than the universe itself. It actually cuts right to the heart of logic and mathematics. For most of the history of mathematics, it was simply assumed that math was rationally justified, that it is coherent, complete, decidable, and computable. As David Hilbert, one of the most brilliant mathematicians of the early 20th century, put it, in mathematics, there is no "we will not know." Not content to simply assume this, Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead set out to provide a solid logical foundation for all of mathematics in their 1910 book, Principia Mathematica. It was an astounding effort, surpassed only by its colossal failure at the hands of Kurt Gödel. In 1931, Gödel published two proofs that established, with as much certainty as mathematics allows, that math itself is, by necessity, incomplete. In any arithmetic system, there must be truths that cannot be proved. No lesser a genius than Ludwig Wittgenstein himself simply refused to accept this. So intransigent were his intuitions on the matter that he stated, mathematics cannot be incomplete any more than a sense can be incomplete. Whatever I understand, I must completely understand. Suffice to say, not only was Wittgenstein wrong, he was proven wrong definitively. The magnitude of this outcome is hard to overstate. For nearly all of human intellectual history, mathematics was taken to be the paradigm of certainty, of rationality, and of truth itself. Now this rational foundation goes out the window. As Gödel later said, it was an amazing fact that our logical intuitions, i.e. intuitions concerning such notions as truth, concept, being, class, etc., are self-contradictory. If our intuitions about mathematical truth can't be trusted, then how are we to trust our intuitions about anything? I want to give a name to this consistent over-reliance on our intuitions. I want to call it the Kalam Cosmological Fallacy, in honor of the argument that most flagrantly falls prey to it today. In case you're not familiar with the Kalam cosmological argument, here's the modern version, popularized by the most vocal of intuition's cheerleaders in contemporary philosophy, William Lane Craig. Premise 1. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2. The universe began to exist. Premise 3. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Conclusion 4. This cause is the God of classical theism and is a personal being because he chose to create the universe. I don't mean to challenge the premises directly, so much as I mean to undermine the justification for premise 1, and, to a lesser degree, premise 2. Craig's justification for premise 1 is simply to insist that our intuitions support it. Craig says that premise 1 is intuitively obvious, based on the metaphysical intuition that something cannot come into being from nothing. He even goes so far as to doubt that anyone could sincerely deny it, apparently oblivious to the fact that it was denied, or at least seriously questioned, by Pyrrho, Hume, and Schopenhauer, among others. In light of everything I've outlined here, however, we can see that it's not necessary to deny it. It's more than sufficient to simply point out that premises justified by appeal to intuition, no matter how strongly felt or difficult to deny, have an abysmal track record. Even if it is intuitively plausible that whatever begins to exist has a cause, is it so much more plausible than the idea that parallel lines never cross? Or that the Earth is standing still? Or that heavier objects fall faster than lighter objects? Or that two events can happen at the same time? Or that mathematics is rationally justified in its entirety? Several of the failures of intuition that we've already seen cast doubt on Craig's argument directly. Aristotle gave the first formulation of the cosmological argument, appealing to his intuitive physics that proved to be so faulty. Relativity and quantum mechanics both suggest the possibility of retrocausation, the idea that effect might actually precede cause. Quantum mechanics also suggests that particles can pop in and out of existence without any cause at all. According to quantum mechanics, it's possible, although highly unlikely, that a macro object, like a car, a whale, or even for that matter an entire universe, can simply pop into existence without any cause at all, simply as a result of the stochastic nature of the quanta. These suggestions are far from indisputable, and there's good reasons to doubt these results. But the principal reason Craig gives for doubting them, that they simply do not fit our intuitions, is not one of those good reasons. Indeed, this is a decidedly bad reason to reject ideas. Until we purge it from our psychology, it will be very hard to see the field clearly and evaluate our conclusions appropriately. That's why I want to call this move, this appeal to intuition as a strong, reliable justification for belief, the Kalam Cosmological Fallacy. This is not to say that intuitions are worthless, or that we should never trust them, or that they have no role to play at all in our investigations. I think that intuitions are a great starting point for thinking about topics such as these, and all other things being equal, an idea being intuitively plausible is a virtue. The mistake that intuition's cheerleaders make is that rather than using it as a starting point, they use intuition as an end point, as a conversation stopper, as a bedrock. People who adopt this attitude are inclined to, if I may steal a phrase from Daniel Dennett, mistake the limits of their imaginations for a metaphysical necessity. Absolute reliance on intuition has proven time and time again to be a poor strategy. It's high time we recognize this method for the fallacy that it is, and relegate it to the dustbin of intellectual history, along with the myriad false ideas it has erroneously led us to believe.